Perfect.
Great.
David, how are you?
Good morning from my end. Good morning.
Good morning. Are you both West Coast?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Where are you?
I'm north of Seattle.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah. I want to start with the role of a producer. I kind of want to get more of your history in filmmaking and also tell me more about what you do, just kind of in general as a producer. And Tiffany, we'll start with you.
Great. Yeah. This is, I've been more of like an executive producer role in the past, more, helping people packaging, figure out their sales, finding their financing. And so this is the first one where I took a deeper role. David is definitely the lead producer on the film, but I, kind of came in and have been pushing it forward as much as I can and helping assist. And so that's how I came on this project. And it's one of the first ones I've been that involved in. So it's been a fun learning and crazy experience.
Absolutely. David, how about you? Tell me more about your role as a producer.
Yeah, I'm trying to turn my video on. I'm not hiding from you guys. It's not appearing for some reason.
We see
We
David,
can see you
so
now.
we see you. Yeah.
Oh, you can. Okay, good. I'm in Laguna Beach for the day, but let me say. So anecdotally, everything Tiffany said. We also just happen to work really well together, and we've known each other for I don't know, maybe 10 years throughout our careers. I started off in the ICM mailroom at 26 years old, and eventually was promoted to agent representing primarily and almost exclusively filmmakers. I worked for Jeff Berg at ICM, so I was on the teams of like Bertolucci, Jonathan Demme, Sidney Lumet, Julie Taymor, some of our cinematic heroes. Um, Paul Schrader being one of them, and I started producing. He asked me to produce his Master Gardener when I became a manager a few years ago, and so O Canada is the second feature that I've produced. So essentially working for filmmakers, on behalf of filmmakers and now for
Mhm.
filmmakers my entire career.
Very cool. Well, Oh Canada. So I had the chance to see this in Toronto, and I was at the premiere screening there. And
Oh, you
yeah,
were? Oh,
I
cool. Okay,
was.
great.
Yeah, I was. It was a really fun experience to be a part of, and really, and we'll talk about Paul here in a little bit because he is a character. But but with Oh Canada, I'm curious about what was it that got you guys on board with this film? What sold you on being a part of this project?
David, you
So
start. Started with you, and then I'll say why I.
yeah, I mean the genesis of it is Paul and Russell Banks are were close friends. They'd collaborated on a feature film called Affliction, which you probably have seen. Thomas and uh, Paul started adapting Russell's book, which is titled Foregone, I guess, in late 2022. Um, and it was sort of a natural process, I guess, of working together. They were close friends. They were going back and forth. I remember when Paul was writing the script, Russell passed away just about a month before Paul completed the adaptation in 2023. Um, so that was the origin of it. And then Paul asked me to produce. Tiffany and I, worked on the financing together. Paul had asked Richard Gere to collaborate again. They had worked together since 1979 or 1980 in American Gigolo, and that was what sort of kickstarted it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
Tiffany, how about you?
yeah. So I had brought some money into the card counter, and as David said, I've been friends with him for over 10 years. So it felt like a safe space to kind of come in a deeper way. And it was one of those projects where Paul was on board, David was on board, and Richard was on board when I came on. And so to me, it was like, this is an interesting package. I really like the project. I've dealt with at least some of this team before. So decided, I'll jump in. I want to help.
Very cool. Um, this is a very interesting film, and I don't know when you were first exposed to the story, if you had a chance to read the script before getting on board, or if you just were able to see the movie. But I really want to know what your first impressions were of the film when you decided to, or whenever you were able to encounter it.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading drafts while Paul and Russell were going back and forth on the adaptation, so I saw it from the initial stages. My impression of the film, I think it's a beautiful kind of kaleidoscopic journey about a man who's reconciling his past, and it's accessible in that it I guess compels us to confront fabrications, truths, um, uh, etc. In our life. Obviously, he's toward the end of his life. He's this sort of leftist um, documentary filmmaker who finally found his footing when he moved to Canada and met his wife Emma, whom Uma Thurman plays in the story. Um, so those are sort of the themes that at least I took from it.
Yeah, and on my side, I read I think it was in the middle draft. He was still working on it, but then the strikes were coming up, so there wasn't much more work that could be done on it. And for me, I think we all know Paul writes men in a very specific way, and this was kind of a continuation of that, but less of like the thriller elements, right? Like we really get into the heart of him more. And one of the things I've said before about this film to me is like watching somebody at the end of their life, particularly like a man with a family at the end of their life, I think I had to do that with my father when I was really young. I kind of watched what it was like for him and him kind of reconciling what was about to happen to him and how he was managing that with his family. So for me, that's kind of what touched on it personally as well as I could relate.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely a very impactful, compelling story here that ended up getting filled with a really awesome cast with Richard Gere, Uma Thurman, Jacob Elordi. Tell me about your impressions of the cast and like how they fit these roles and kind of made this film what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it was so satisfying to see Uma in a sort of non-virago role, right?
Mhm.
Like we've seen her in Kill Bill and Pulp Fiction. I really loved her dramatic turn here. I think she lends so much uh, interest, complexity in that marriage to Richard Gere because he's obviously his character was not a saint in the film, and right there's a lot underscoring their marriage, a lot which is unsaid in the film. Jacob Elordi, we were fortunate to get shortly after, I guess, Richard signed on. I think he's incredible. We were all impressed by the amount of research that he endeavored to do and sort of studying early Richard Gere from you know Gigolo, uh, Good Bar, Days of Heaven, all those early films. I remember he watched to sort of learn, his mannerisms and gestures, and I think that comes across in the character. And Imperioli was just, oh my God, Sopranos. Say no more. One of the great series of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Richard really sings in it. I think like his performance is like soft and subtle, but like you really get the depth behind it. And we were just, I also think getting that cast at, in an independent film is like a testament to Paul and what he's able to deliver and how people care about his work and how it's been that way for a number of years. So, we felt really thrilled to be working with everybody.
Hmm. Absolutely. Let's chat about Paul. So I haven't had a whole lot of encounters with him, but I was at the premiere screening and got to see the Q&A and get a sense of his sense of humor. um, he's a great guy. I mean, I loved listening to him talk, and I hope that I get to encounter more of his perspective on film and filmmaking in the future. But yeah, tell me about your history with Paul and yeah, what appeals to you about him, and maybe if you have any stories that come along with this production and your interaction with him.
David will speak to. I got stuck with COVID, and then my mom had an emergency surgery, so I unfortunately didn't get all of the time on set that I really wanted with him. But I like he's hilarious and fun, and I will let David really speak to that because they are the ones with a very deep relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, how long have I known him? I started representing him as an agent about 12 years ago, and then transitioned to management and producing, like I said, on Master Gardener. So
Mhm.
that's part one of your question. Part two, I mean, he's a marvel to watch on set. He's one of the most adaptive, um, smart, uh, thoughtful filmmakers that you could see on set. I mean, he gets every. I mean, he's so well prepared. The script is so, uh, obviously well written in advance that he doesn't take more than a few takes. Like he will edit the film in his head to eliminate, having to film a lot of coverage. And so it's everyone who sort of has the privilege to visit his sets marvels at sort of his speed, his detail, what a master he is.
Mhm.
That's the truth. Actors, crew, everyone up and down the call sheet.
Yeah, I certainly got a good sense of like who he is. I had a conversation with Andrew, the cinematographer on the film, and just
Uh-huh.
had glowing stories about their history and who Paul is, and it's so cool to like hear the behind the scenes of how he goes about filmmaking and curating relationships and everything. So that's really awesome, guys.
Yeah.
Um, the film premiered at Cannes. Like, how cool is that? Premiered at Cannes. It had its North American premiere at TIFF. It's playing in New York right now, right? At the New York Film
Correct.
Festival.
Yeah,
Yeah,
premieres
so
on the 5th. Yeah.
so it's just tearing through these major film festivals. Tell me about how you feel about the exposure this film is getting in the film festival circuit.
I mean, Paul's films traditionally um, have traditionally played at these types of festivals. Um, as they're sort of the gatekeepers that without them, I don't know what independent cinema. I don't know how it survives, right?
Mhm.
They sort of they sort of not only taste to make but amplify all these films that wouldn't otherwise have the exposure. Um, it was thrilling to be in Cannes. I recall Tiffany on that red carpet leading up to the steps of Palais. Just sort of we were both in this great, sort of sense of wonder. I know that she has a long history with the festival. I started off um, as an intern there doing, uh, uh, big and rosé runs for my bosses at ICM. Is like as an intern, and then I was an assistant and sort of a grad. I always envisioned having a film there, let alone in competition. You know, so
Yeah, it was super special. I mean, I think to David's point, there was a part of me that never even it's the Cannes is a pinnacle of what you can do in independent film or with auteur filmmakers. Like even people doing studio films want to be in Cannes. So that was just one of the most special moments ever. And to do it with like partners and people that you love working with and being able to share it, it was pretty magical.
how are we going to top it, Tiffany? Like,
Well, that's the problem, David.
where do we go from here? I guess just keep hitting. I guess Cannes is now the benchmark. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cannes is the benchmark. And certainly I have not been to Cannes yet. It is really high on my priorities list. One of these years I'll make it happen, but it always looks so glamorous, and it's really awesome to see the films that premiere at Cannes trickle down into the other film festivals and start to make their way into the world. And I think the programming is just always so top notch. I one day I can't wait to get there.
You will. You
Yeah,
have.
you just sort of like are also astounded by the history of that
Hmm.
festival too. I mean, by which is I mean Venice, Toronto, all of these sort of major festivals, not just Cannes, but you just marvel at the history and the types of filmmakers that have launched their careers there.
Hmm.
You know, like it's pretty astounding.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, maybe on the subject of filmmakers and launching their career, I love talking with producers and getting behind the scenes on how these films are made. But something that I do think about in my off time is like, how does someone get there? How does someone be in a position that you guys are in? It was really cool having Oliver recommend me to you, and I'm getting that there's like networks, there's like connections and everything. So tell me about like what it takes to be a producer, to be a filmmaker from your guys' perspective.
Filmmaker producer specifically, or filmmaker more on the director side? Sorry, because
You
some people have different definitions. So just
and this is me like learning more about how this works, right? So like I guess I want to get your perspective on being in the industry. How do we get to a position like how do you get to your position? What are your recommendations for people who aspire to do what you guys do in filmmaking?
I mean, for me, I think like so much of it is networking. And I also think that like there's no particular right path to becoming a filmmaker or producer. I think it's about what works best for you and how you find your way in. But at the end of the day, it all has to do with like being willing to do the hard work, not just the fun work. And then also being able to network and making sure that you build relationships, because that's what happened here with David and I, right? Like we
Hmm.
built a relationship over time. And so I think, it's something that's not going to happen right away, but you have to be patient and keep pushing.
Yeah, absolutely. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think there's different on ramps to the highway in terms of how you become a filmmaker producer. I know Tiffany had a background in foreign sales. As I mentioned earlier, I started off in the mailroom at ICM and dedicated my career so far to supporting filmmakers, specifically auteurs, specifically those who have more of a singular point of view. Um, and it it's just it's still exciting, invigorating to get behind some of these directors and help them do their best work, and help them to create what they're obsessing over.
Yeah.
I
I would also like to say too. I mean, as much as and as exciting as that was to be able to sort of like um, create jobs during last year during two labor strikes for people who needed them, and there was a dearth of any kind of activity on the film and TV side for those approximately 6 months. It was really satisfying to be personally just to create jobs for New Yorkers, to be frank.
Yeah, that's great. Tiffany, I think you're about to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think also it's about finding people that balance you really well, which I think is the case with David and I. And even one of like the small things too. Like I remember one night we were grabbing a drink after shooting one day, and like the people he wants to champion are more like auteurs and real film, like the directors, right? Which is like how he kind of sees the way he wants to follow how he comes on as a producer. And for me, I'm very story driven. So even like those little things where you balance each other and help each other, and then just like where he has connections is not where I do, and like some same on the vice versa. So that was really good. And I think finding those people in your life is helpful.
That's awesome, guys. Um, the future of O Canada. So, like we said, it's playing at the New York Film Festival. When is the next opportunity that people might be able to see this film?
Well, it's playing at New York on the 5th and the 6th. There's another interim festival between now and the December 6th release. Um, Kino's doing a limited, a platform release on it starting December 6th. We'll have one festival in the interim. I don't know if it's okay for me to announce it, but I can email you if it is.
That'd be great.
Um, yeah, I definitely will. And obviously encourage people to, it's if I had not seen the film 50 times already, it's something I would take my parents to. You know, like there's a cross generational component between people in middle age and you know their parents and their parents, grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking this time to chat with me about this film. I think it was a very, very special film to have at Toronto, and I'm happy that I got to see it in Canada. Um,
I think I'm going to turn if you don't mind, I'm going to turn the table on you and ask you
yeah.
what did you sort of glean from it, or what were the sort of key themes that resonated with you most?
Oh man, I really resonated with the sense of reflection and honest reflection because
Yeah,
he's very intent on like I need to get this story out as authentically as it is, regardless of how how damning it might be or how like, I just want to get this story out before, before it's too late. And so I that really resonated with me and having the flashbacks and visually having the different styles to indicate where we are in the story was also super interesting in the film. Um, yeah, and I really liked the tone and the mood of it. It is kind of subdued and subtle, but it's such a compelling story. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the film and of course the cast as well. It's funny because Paul addresses the differences between the same characters in the film, where Jacob Elordi is playing Richard Gere, and they don't really
right.
look similar at all. But it's such a great cast that, suspension of disbelief. It did not bother me at all in the film. It was still cool to see them as the same character. And you can tell that there's an attempt at like being similar people. And
Yeah,
I thought that was a really interesting note to mention in the Q&A. But it was certainly it didn't bother me because the cast is so great. So
yeah. I think Paul also said that if that Jacob would have been certainly been in the top running um, in 1980 if he was auditioning for American Gigolo as well with Richard Gere. Same type. Yeah, same type of guy. So to your point, it didn't necessarily was not necessarily consequential that they weren't dead ringers for each other, right?
right. Yeah,
They
no.
convey the
It's
same.
memory too, so sometimes you make up what you look like in your
That
memory.
is true. That's actually a really good point. I love that. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who would like to imagine themselves as Jacob Elordi when they're
Yeah.
younger. That's great. Okay, guys, thank you again so much for this. I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait for more people to see Oh Canada, and I'm wishing you guys the best going forward in your careers and filmmaking efforts. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
stay.